Welcome to Writers and Books, a Visiting Author series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We're celebrating different ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. We're so excited to have Holly Wren Spaulding with us this evening. First, we'll hear from Holly, and then she'll be in conversation with author Sejal Shah, author of This Is One Way to Dance. Please say hello in the chat and let us know you're there. You can submit questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Holly's book, Familiars, is available through Poetry Forge. I'll put the link in the chat. Holly Wren Spaulding's poems, articles, and reviews have appeared in The New York Times, The Nation, Michigan Quarterly Review, Witness, The Ecologist, and in the book We Are Everywhere, The Irresistible Rise of Global Anti-Capitalism. She has published two earlier collections of poems, If August in 2017 and Pilgrim in 2014. A passionate collaborator, teacher, editor, and writer, Spaulding founded Poetry Forge in 2012 and teaches creative writing for Interlochen College of Creative Arts. Holly, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Writers and Books. Thank you, Sejal. Thank you, friends across the great distances. I'm coming to you from southern Maine, very close to the seacoast. And it's getting dark here, it's rainy. And as I thought about how my day would end, I was just so pleased to know that I was going to hang out with my dear friend Sejal Shah, whom I've known for, what is it, Sejal? No, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. Our sense of time is increasingly warped. I think maybe we all have that in common. But we started talking about having this conversation maybe a year ago, really very much around the time when Sejal's collection of essays, This Is One Way to Dance, came out. I suppose that was in June. And this will involve some reading from my book, but I think the really special opportunity is for us to talk about what it's been like to make books and to do that side by side as friends, as people who have launched books during a global pandemic, as longtime friends. I mean, we met when neither of us had published significantly, I think, except for in journals. So we've sort of come through this phase of, some significant milestones together. And so it's really sweet for me to have you here, Sejal. Thanks for suggesting we do this. Should I just go ahead and read a few poems and then we'll talk?
Yeah, I think that would be great, Holly. I did have a request for Boar because of the lilacs, and the Lilac Festival season is coming up in Rochester, and Holly's been to Highland Park when she's visited. So
why don't I start with that? I made just a very short little list of poems I would read because mostly I want to talk to you. And that wasn't on it, but it's actually kind of, even though this poem appears really toward the end of this book, this is the book. And as I was saying to Dan, just as we were beginning, I think of this as a sequence of poems that attains its power, or I think the impact is there primarily when they're read together and side by side. So I'll sort of seek to give you a little flavor of these poems. And Boar is actually kind of a nice place to start. And by way of context, I will simply say that I set out to write these poems with a list of words that I wanted to write poems for. And all of the words are, they're all nouns. They're the names of plants and animals and landscapes. And these words had been removed from the Oxford Junior Dictionary some years prior to when I came across the list. And they were removed so as to make space in that volume for words that sort of more, I was about to say more accurately represent, I don't know if that's actually true, that words that are in more common use these days because they have to do with the realm of the technological. And so we're using those kinds of words. We're using words like broadband and chat room, and we're not so much using words like bore and dandelion. And the dictionary, of course, reflects, the way we live and the way we speak. But I am, in addition to being a poet and a teacher, an activist and an environmentalist, and I felt like maybe I could create a little project for myself to recuperate some of this language and steward it. And when Dan mentioned that the theme at Writers and Books this year is taking care, I took note of that because this project for me has been very much about sort of taking care of some language and taking interest in the creatures and landscapes and plants that language points toward. So I think that's enough of a context. So I'll dedicate this poem to you, Sejal, and to anyone else who lives in a place where the lilacs will soon bloom. They come along a little bit later here in Maine. So this is boar, as in the wild pig. A certain kind of person will survive the great derangement. Track me through heat and insects, mud and underbrush. They won't care if I'm rough-skinned. A gamey flavor is nothing to them. A winter's worth of meat, though. What they don't know is my gift of premonition. I can tell you there will be difficult years, horrors beyond any already fathomed. But sometime after, blue will flow back, rare seeds after long dormancy, pastures laced with sorghum. You can't imagine what you'll hear when all the machines stop and bees kissing after everything. Remember the lilacs of childhood? Like that, but on and on. So I'm thinking about climate change in this book, and I'm thinking about the knowledge of these beings, the way in which they know things that we don't have the capacity to know. I definitely set out with questions. I have had questions about how to live, how to be on a planet that's suffering so terribly, in all the realms, honestly, environmentally, socially, geopolitically, I mean, name it. There's a lot of suffering going on. And I was thinking about, what do these plants and creatures have to say to us that might help us understand how to survive, how to take care of each other, how to notice what's important.
Holly, if I could jump in just for a minute,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you this later, but I was looking at the Lost Lexicon. I wonder either now or later if you could talk about how this project evolved, how it came out of collaboration. I remember when you were working on that, and then it became a book that has a different title and has a different, I think, structure than what you had originally thought.
Yeah, gosh, it's nice to see that piece of ephemera. Well, the first phase of this project, and I've come to really, this might be interesting to some of the folks who are here. I now think of the things I'm working on in terms of phases, you know, because it can be very often my idea is bigger than my life, or it's bigger than is feasible in in kind of the short term. And so I'll think about what can I do now, and then maybe over time more is possible. So in the earliest iteration of this, I was preparing a body of work to be exhibited in a gallery in northern Michigan, and this was in the context of a artist residency there at the Luna Cultural Center. And I had my words. I had access to a printing studio where I was collaborating with a master printer. This is Big Wheel Press in East Hampton, Massachusetts. I was working with William Muller there. And I imagined an installation, a sort of immersive installation, where I would place poems arranged sort of A to Z, if you will, or arranged alphabetically in the space. And for the purposes of that exhibit, I created, I think, 22 poems, and then printed them with Bill on beautiful paper, on these big antique presses. And the alphabetical arrangement both mirrors, of course, the way words appear in a dictionary, but also I really wanted to guide visitors through the gallery. You know, here's where you begin, and then, you know, you sort of move through the space. And that worked great for that. And that was also it was only after that exhibit that I started thinking about whether or not there was a book. So I spent a couple of years writing poems toward a book. And I would say I was about 2.5 years in when I had a conversation with our friend, Jim Borstein, dear friend Jim Borstein, about structure. And he was sort of interrogating the logic of the alphabetical organization, which made very good sense in the gallery, but as it turned out, maybe seemed a little bit arbitrary to him when I described the book. And so that put some doubt. I started to feel some doubt about whether that was actually the right way to arrange the book, and spent maybe the year that followed really up to the 11th hour trying to understand how to organize these poems in a way that would be less arbitrary. And I think really the big goal was how we always think about this when making a book, whether, you know, essays, I know this was on your mind with This Wind Way to Dance, or with poems, how can one thing lead to another and lead to another, and there can the effect of that kind of compound, and so that you end up with a sum greater than its parts. So these poems are not arranged alphabetically. They're arranged in 3 sections, and each section has a title. So it's arranged according to admissions, testimonials, and foretellings. And in my imagination, and I think that you can pick this up, but whether or not a reader picks this up, I imagine sort of walking through a wildland, and beginning with entering into a forest. And there are little descriptions at the beginning of each section that sort of cue you to where you are in the landscape. And then there's a lot of structural things going on in this book that I don't expect most readers to pick up on, but it was important to figure that out. And I think, you know, sensitive readers then do appreciate the care that's taken in terms of trying to understand the relationships between individual pieces, and, you know, where do you begin and where do you end up. So that's kind of the short version of what I have to say about that. Was there anything else that you and I have talked about that you think is interesting?
No, I just loved hearing the progression. I think often, you know, when a book is out in the world, it's like, here's the product. But I think especially, Holly, because I worked with you also on, you know, as you did a round of editing on my book, like thinking about, yeah, the relationship between these individual poems or essays, and then what it takes to create a vision in a manuscript. I guess this is my last request, and then I'll stop talking, is for you to read the epigraph for the book too.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, don't stop talking. This is a lot more fun for me if you do.
And she's a boa poet. So there's
yes.
a Rochester connection too. Right?
Yes. Okay. So here's the epigraph. And it's from a poem by Araceli Esquermay. I'm hesitating a little bit there because I've heard her name pronounced so many times, but Araceli Esquermay. And the poem is called Elegy, and I chose 4 lines from this poem, which is a beloved poem, to open this book. And I will just say, and I know you went through this too, Sejal, I had a lot of lines. I had a lot of epigraphs that I considered for this purpose, because throughout writing, as I was writing this book, there were many sort of tutelary texts. There were things that I was reading that informed what I was doing, that were important to me, that, you know, maybe that's the way to open your book. You know, you've got to ask the question, just because it's important to you, you know, is that what the book needs, or is that what a reader needs? But in the end, I chose these 4 lines. Listen to me. I am telling you a true thing. This is the only kingdom, the kingdom of touching, the touches of the disappearing things. So that's from her book, Kingdom Animalia.
It's beautiful.
I feel like it does a lot to set this book up right away. You know, like, we're talking about loss. There is an elegiac tone to this body of work. We're talking about disappearance. We're talking about touch. In fact, you know, maybe the next poem I'll read will be, I'll read the very first poem. So this one is, it's called Beech. So we're talking in this case about the beech tree. And these are trees that are really beautiful and I think stately and kind of mythological looking. Beech. The path ahead is a ribbon of earth, lit by afternoon sun. Branches drape down. A traveler reaches out, bare wrist, leather glove, to stroke the oncoming green as if softly in love. So it's a flavor. That's where we start. I'm going to read actually the poem that almost all of these poems were written, you know, once I understood what I was, you know, like that I was working with these words, this sort of what I called a lost lexicon for a long time. Oh yeah, you said that the title changed too. Yes, it did. I called it Lost Lexicon for like 2.5, 3 years. And then I realized, wait, this isn't, they're not lost. They're here. They're here. They exist. And then I went through a long process of generating probably 60 other possible titles, and ultimately landed on Familiars. In fact, I sent this to my publisher under the title My Familiars, and then I had grave doubts about that. And someone at Alice Greene Company said, Colin said, well, what if you just drop My? And I thought, oh yeah, that solves it. I didn't like the sort of possessive tone of the My once I stepped away from it. So anyway, now it's called Familiars.
Holly, it's such a process, right? Like figuring out titles, right? Like
Yes.
like my book for a couple of years was called Things People Say, right? And before, I think there was another version, Castle Fort Lookout House, which I think you suggested, and I love that title.
Yeah.
But
and there were
right.
others. I mean, How to Make Your Mother Cry
Right.
was that collection, and now it's a different collection.
Now it's a different collection. Right?
So, I mean, you know, this is how we spend our time, people. This is what we're thinking about. And it's both like tear your hair out and like kind of the most interesting thing, I think, to be preoccupied with.
Absolutely.
So yeah, what I thought I would do is like read the one poem in this collection that was sort of pre-existed by a number of years, but then because well, I don't need to tell you why. It has a home here for a bunch of different reasons. So the poem is called Pasture. These geese keep landing in the overgrown field, bodies the same slate gray as the crates of shingles left by a neighbor who died suddenly at 40. These animals, their language in the high grass calling. This place between that's not their home, where no one settles since the widow sold the horses. This first heat of summer, making blue in the iris, peonies eaten open by ants. This 3-year-old who crouches now to admire new mushrooms, whose smooth tan caps and hidden gills she names beautiful. So I guess this poem is 9 years old because the 3-year-old is now 12. So I slipped that one in, and all the rest of them were written, since January 2017. So I wrote all the rest of the poems within the difficult years of the last administration. And it became my way to sort of pour out my concern and my tears, my angst. And then it was finished. So should I read maybe one or two littles, and then we don't have all the time in the world, so. You gave such a beautiful reading of Dandelion. I might have you read that one. You read that one today. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Yeah, will you read Dandelion, and then I'll read like 2 littles, and then we can talk about some of the other things we promised people we'd talk about.
Yeah. Dandelion. I read this on Instagram. I've never done that before, but I thought I would try it. Holly does readings, and I like hearing them. So. Dandelion. You could work all year with poison and blades. Night, then late night, and still this yellow, dusted glow, stem silking to pink. Everyone knows our true name endures. They want us gone, but we won't go. I love it.
Thank you for reading that. So as I shared with Sejal over text after I saw her little reading this morning, that poem was written, that was, there's like a little story behind every one of these poems. And I bet that our audience are mostly poets, so you know how that works. But that poem was how I kind of worked out in language, or worked out on the page, some of the things I was feeling and am feeling. I continue to feel these things in relation to what has been happening at the US-Mexico border and the treatment of people in the detention camps there. So, there is a wish for these poems to meet readers in the, where we are in the world with, concerns that are both longstanding and rather immediate, I guess. Okay, maybe just 2 more. A lot of the poems in this book are very, very short, because when I created the Lost Lexicon, I was thinking about how to make something that would work in a gallery in a kind of immediate way, sort of a poem that would reach you and go sort of straight to your heart, hopefully before you had a chance to move on. What is it the kids say these days? Too long didn't read. Like, oh my gosh. I think I'm trying to write poems that aren't met with that sort of sentiment. And yet, of course, I also feel like we need space for the longer thought. We need space to, sometimes we need more words to say something that needs to be said. And yet I did give myself the assignment to write sort of as compactly as I could. I was really thinking about these as little essences. So here's one example of that. And I'll just show folks, if you can see, it's a pretty short little, 7-liner. So we're in the spring season. This one's called Crocus. I traveled cold dominions to arrive. When a woman leans close, we recognize each other. Actually, where's ox? I should read ox too. Ox is we're in the year of the ox. This book has been out for a few months, but I'm still finding my way around within the pages. Ox. Don't think I never wonder what else I might have been. This will be last. Starling. Coyotes crying all night in a landscape of rocks and scrub oaks. Dust. Come here, they said. Sagebrush, or did she dream it? Opened both doors, all the windows. Let wind in. A slick brown snake uncoiled on the threshold. Birds flying fast from the soffits. Ancient light. Mountains. An orange couch. A warmth she walked into.
Thank you, Holly. Beautiful. I have lots of questions here, and I know we don't have that much time. So also, if any, there is the Q&A if anyone wants to put your questions there. I was thinking about how do you balance your work as a teacher and editor and mentor of writers with your own writing and with making your own manuscripts?
Well, I always write first. Like I start my day writing. So, and that is like kind of that's my prime time of day to write. And, but it's not the prime time of day for me to talk to people or teach. So it sort of fits very comfortably. You know, I sort of place working on my own poems next to the other activities, and each occupies its own space. I think that might be important.
You know, Holly, I'm going to just jump in to say that I had written this down actually when I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to say that that really stayed with me, especially in this time that, you know, we've all been spending a lot of time at home, most of us, that when you visited me, when you were driving from Massachusetts to Michigan, I remember you're talking about your studio practice, and you said, you know, I don't talk in the morning, you know, I take that first. Well, it was very instructive for me. You know, I think we're often like, as a guest, I sort of think, okay, I have to fit into somebody else's, what their routine is. And it was great to see you hold that space for yourself. Mm-hmm. And also to communicate it to other people, even to me as another writer. I hadn't, you know, I think people who meditators do that too, but it stayed with me. I think it, how did you strengthen your practice to be able to not interrupt it when traveling?
Gosh, I do remember that. I remember sitting in that chair in your home, and like, I think I remember the mug itself. Well, you know, I was just speaking about this with some of my students in the last couple of days. It made a really big impression on me to go away to artist residency the first time that happened, and basically have the experience of sustained focus on my own work. You know, I wasn't going off to my multiple jobs, which at that time in my life, I always had at least 3 going. And so I had this sensation of like, gosh, you start your day this way and you stay with it. And that was amazing. And I think that muscle memory has been a big part of it. The other piece is, of course, you know, just getting to know myself. But I would also point to sort of pure desire. Like, this is what I want to do. I'm not a writer who's like, oh God, but I hate to write. Like, no, this is exactly what I like to do. It's the most fun. There are very few things that I would rather do particularly in the morning, but like in general, it's still the thing that I most want to do when I have available time and energy. So it starts from that. And I, as I say to my students, like walk through the door of pleasure. Like, what is this? What part of this do you like? Go do that. And then, the parts that you maybe like a little less or dislike, because of course you and I both know there's plenty of parts of particularly the public side of being writers that are more challenging. And we do experience resistance and setbacks and whatever. So that has it's a sacrosanct space. I have treated it that way for, probably 15 years. And then the teaching, I love the teaching. It means having conversations with people about the things I'm interested in. And when it comes to making manuscripts, I love that as well. I'm sort of teaching to my own interests and questions in that case. And I do have a practice of working on a personal manuscript at the same time I'm teaching or working with others on their manuscript in a class context. So that means I don't really run the same risk of feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm giving the best of what I got away, and now I don't have anything left for myself, which is kind of it's not to say that that's never happened, and I do experience depletion, but I really have made a lot of effort to design a life in which that I'm not in that situation.
No, yeah. I mean, the first question I had for you was, what is the role of artist residencies in your work? And I wonder now that, we have been at home, well, you're doing something like this now, right? Like a virtual artist residency.
Artist in residence at home, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, I obviously love to go away. I mean, that's ideal. It means I get to hang out with, that's where I met you. So I for sure have met some of my favorite people that way. And I've absolutely found residencies to be catalytic in terms of projects. And getting meaningful amounts of work done, and both being an artist among artists and being, especially when I was much younger, like being treated like one was really valuable to me.
Yeah, I think also, you had this with is your mother a painter? Right? Yeah, I think just getting to be around visual artists for me as a writer was really important. I think for you too.
I love that, being around other disciplines. But in terms of the last year, my lifestyle didn't actually change that much because I'm kind of a natural hermit. I obviously canceled travel and things that would have otherwise involved being away from home. But at some point I was like, wait, this is actually a lot like a residency. Radical simplicity, like not going anywhere. Only the things that matter. My work continued because my teaching occurs at this point entirely in a virtual realm. But that works for me. And my relationships by and large have continued in that way. And that's great too.
How do you know when a book is done? How do you know what the contours of a project are?
Well, let us salute the hero editors in the world.
Yeah.
Whether that's, a friend, a peer who's talking to us about the work and kind of like helping to move it along, or, those that are with our publishers who are really getting into the weeds with us and figuring that sort of thing out. I had a manuscript accepted. I just signed the contract last week actually for another chapbook. And this was basically accepted more or less the way it is. We pulled out 4 poems and that was it. And that's the first time that's happened, where I essentially delivered something that was almost, I would say, essentially done, minus these easy cuts. But the rest of the time, there is that editorial role that's really important. And I wonder how many other like when you're coming up, you think, oh, it's all up to me. I have to figure out everything. Well, ideally, there is someone else who's in there with you, sharing in the conversation and helping to answer those questions. And so I've needed that to know when it was done. And
I think it's so important.
Cry myself away.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think, I don't know what this was like for you in your master's, but like in my MFA program, we didn't talk about manuscripts. Like you did put together a thesis, but that was it. So there wasn't, there wasn't that language around, and I think, right, having really serious readers, whether it's a friend or, going through the editorial process. What I did was at a university press, and that was sometimes frustrating. The reader reports are really good, but it was almost like what I think can be frustrating about workshop. You're getting these different comments, right?
It can be a lot of cooks in the kitchen, I think, is one of the risks.
Well, and you can see you can see different ways of going, but it's a matter of, I heard you say in a conversation last week, like the importance of intuition, and tarot, and honing that. And I was thinking, even working with an editor, you still have to know what your true north is.
I think that's true. And I certainly rely on intuition, or just my own good sort of common sense, and my own, at this point, you and I have both read a lot. We have a deep background in thinking carefully about texts. And, I worked as a book reviewer for 15 years. And very recently I was realizing how helpful that was. It's like super low paid, extremely difficult work. You spend 15 hours thinking carefully about a book and writing something thoughtful about it, like 400 or 500 words, and you get paid $50 and you're like,
right.
what am I doing with my life? Like, you cannot even buy groceries on this sort of money. However, it did teach me over all those years how to look carefully and think about, what am I seeing? And I think that knowledge is really valuable. And then there's just like your own instinct, because at the end of the day, this is art. You try to like think through the structure or whatever in this sort of rational mode, but we are not only thinking about it in those terms, of course.
I also, I picked some flowers from the front and backyard. These reminded me of you, Holly, just because of arrangement, like
yes.
How important it. I always felt in being around you, the arrangement of things, not because they're things, but I think as a way of attention. Even when Holly and I did a DIY residency at the Malay colony, I think we were there maybe a little less than a week in the off season, and there were some flowers there. You must have brought some flowers.
It was exactly this time of year, because I brought well, no, it was
I think you had daffodils.
I brought you daffodils.
Yeah.
Well, here you go. This one's from my garden.
Oh.
I see that Dan is letting us know that our time is winding down, but I will, because you're bringing up arrangements, I want to share this one thing, because I do think you're exactly right about arrangements.
And we do have one question in the chat.
Let's skip that story. Let's look at the question.
This is Fred Fletcher. You do a lot of teaching. Do you ever want to take classes as a student, perhaps from a lifelong learning perspective, or just to remind yourself what a student experience is?
Absolutely. I take classes all the time. Definitely. And not strictly in the realm of creative writing. Yeah. I took a great plant class this time last year.
Yeah, I love taking classes too. I think we're just about at time, but Holly, thank you again for sharing your work. This is Familiars. You can get it through Poetry Forge. Writers and Books wasn't able to carry it, get it through Ampersand, but this is an earlier book of Holly's that I really love too, If August. And I couldn't find Pilgrim.
It's out of print. This is the best way to get the book, is through Alice Green, because I actually only have a couple of copies here at Poetry Forge at present. I'll have more soon, but yeah, we'll do another session where we talk about the conundrums of distribution, both during a pandemic and otherwise.
I know.
You write your book and you're like, the people can't get the book. How are the people going to get the book? But
But books make their way in the world, right?
They do. They make their way.
They do. We're just a little bit slower right now.
Yes, and I think that's fine. Hi, Dan.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you to both. Thank you to Sejal and Holly. Buy the book. You can catch up with past readings on our website, wab.org. This one will be posted there within 2 weeks, so you can check back then. I want to thank everyone for coming, and have a great night.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Writers and Books.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Hey.
you.
Happy spring.